What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. We got exciting updates in the possible UAPs or UFOs over Ukraine captured by some astronomers using meteor detection software. A lot of controversy. Avi Loeb, Harvard professor and Galileo project lead, has chimed in. He came in guns blazing, and he was surprised when guns started blazing all around him. So interesting case. I've learned quite a bit already, and let's get to it. Chris Lato, welcome to Lato Files. My most popular video by far was UFOs captured over Ukraine, 600,000 views in less than a week. So phenomenal interest in this topic. Scientist Avi Loeb, so leader of the Galileo project, author of Extraterrestrial, inspiration, and many people, including myself, came in guns blazing, saying that it's obviously artillery shells, that the astronomers made a huge mistake. And he was surprised actually when he got more attacks from all around, from both sides, the UFO, UAP community, and from the debunking community as well. It's been quite a few updates, interesting case, and I think still we can keep learning from this and get possible future detects of these objects. Thanks for being here. Please smash that like button if you do like this content. Subscribe for future notifications of when I release these videos, and support the channel at patreon.com/Chris Lato. If I don't say that, you won't do it. I do appreciate the support. Thanks for being here. Okay, this was the initial paper, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Observation of Events, by primarily this scientist, Boris Zilyaev. I've already made a full video about that read through of this report. You can check that out at this link. This was the original article, I think, that kind of broke the news from the debrief. So Micah Hanks at the debrief, great job, back in August 26th, had this article, Cosmics and Phantoms, Ukrainian Independent Study Reveals Observations of Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. I remember reading this, and my initial impressions were it's interesting, but I'd like to see more data. And it's shown this image, which you may have seen is actually a composite image that we'll talk through in this video that Avi Loeb has contention with, okay? This is the same image, or the same object, separated by 0.02 seconds. Micah Hanks from the debrief originally broke this story back in August 26 with Cosmics and Phantoms, Ukrainian Independent Study Reveals Observations of Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. The recent update, again from Micah Hanks, this was on October 4th now, says controversial Ukrainian UAP study shot down in statement by Scientific Council. Okay, so that was October 4th. First reported in an article by the debrief in August, the one I just showed you, our publication noted that authors do not propose any possible explanations or hypotheses regarding the objects and their appearance, or whether they could have mundane underlying sources. That was my initial take too. I was just excited to see people out there trying to capture these things, right? Trying to capture the data. But my initial impressions was they're looking, this is some way to do it. So if other stations could try it, if they could replicate it, here's an idea, and that they're continuing to look at. That was my initial impression. Micah says here, the broad public interest will not allow me to debate, Zilyaev told the debrief in an email. It is not acceptable to discuss scientific works, Zilyaev said, apparently declining further comment or clarification regarding our questions, though adding, so he did add this, I can say that we are working on and planning a new publication. So that is awesome. Happy to see that. Following the September meeting, the MAU-NASU Scientific Council issued a request that the original paper, which was allowed to remain on the observatory's website, be revised to reflect that the authors of the paper were solely responsible for conducting the independent study, with no participation of the MAU-NASU. This is their website. It probably gets way more views now. It's probably getting many more views of this website than before. So now we get to Avi Loeb's article, Down to Earth Limits on Unidentified Phenomena in Ukraine. This is that same photo of the Phantoms and the Swifts. Okay, Avi never mentions the Swifts. Avi says, over the past 2 weeks, I was bombarded by a dozen requests to read a new report by astronomers on unidentified aerial phenomena in Ukraine. My response to all these messages was the same. I'm not sure what to make of the report. Ukraine is in a military conflict with a lot of human-made activity in the sky. This must introduce a lot of noise for any search for objects that are not human-made. In science, we aim to maximize the signal-to-noise ratio, and so Ukraine would be the last place on Earth or I would initiate UAP studies. So just from this first statement, I get the impression that Avi doesn't think that the Foo Fighters or UAPs could be even a possibility, right? Because the simple reason that people have been writing me to ask, why don't you check this out? The biggest reason is that the fact that there were UAPs over an active war zone. So looking back, Foo Fighters, the actual name Foo Fighters came for UAPs, orbs, basically, that followed aircrew into battle back in World War II. Those were the initial Foo Fighters. There's many reports from Allies and Axis side. So both were seeing these reports. So in that case, it would make sense to actually look for UAPs around a active war zone. This is kind of the first instance. I don't think Avi has any impression or any idea that UAPs could actually be here, like could be a reality. That's my impression. He's coming from a scientific perspective. He's coming from a totally skeptical perspective, just my initial impression, because that would be the reason to look for UAPs in a war zone, is because historically you have Foo Fighters. But last evening I received a special request from a high-level official in the US government to summarize my thoughts on observable signatures of UAP, and so this morning I checked the UAP report from Ukraine and wrote a paper about it a few hours later. So Avi even says he wasn't going to look into it, right? Because it didn't interest him. It wasn't interesting to him. He didn't think there could be UAPs there, or if there were, we couldn't find them because you're obviously going to find some other man-made object flying through the sky, right? So a few hours later, he wrote a paper and sent it out. So this is the paper here. It basically says everything you need to know in the abstract. It's not so long, okay? I think he says later in an interview that he had a lot of these equations. But he does have it. And first, I just want to say I really do appreciate Avi writing this paper and putting it out there, right? As you see, if you put out any sort of comments, any sort of analysis, and it actually has any sort of impact, you're going to get a lot of attacks back, if you will, Okay, so I think he can learn from these attacks. Here's the abstract. A recent report by astronomers about unidentified aerial phenomena in Ukraine, he references the report, suggests dark phantom objects of sizes 3 to 12 meters, moving at speeds of up to 15 kilometers per second, at a distance of up to 10 to 12 kilometers, with no optical emission. I showed that the friction of such objects with the surrounding air would have generated a bright optical fireball, reducing their inferred distance by a factor of 10, is fully consistent with the size and speed of artillery shells. So this is basically his argument here, and the rest of the paper does show the math for it, okay? But basically, what it is if something is moving 15 kilometers per second and it is 10 kilometers away, then if you move it to 1 kilometer away, it'll now be moving at 1.5 kilometers per second, right? You just reduce everything by a factor of 10. So Avi searched maybe online and saw that artillery shells move at around 1 to 1.5 kilometers per second. And so these are most likely artillery shells. And he's not even most likely, he says it's fully consistent with the size and speed of artillery shells, implying that this is all it is, right? He solved the case. He did it. He woke up. He didn't want to do it. They were like, hey, you should do this. He said, no, not interested. And then finally someone asked him from a high enough level. And so he's like, okay, fine, I'll look into it. And just as I suspected, artillery shells. And he honestly could be correct. Okay, these could be artillery shells. I've been in active war zones. I don't remember artillery just flying over my head all the time. Everywhere I looked, you can't even see them really. But anyway, this is Avi's argument. That's what he explains here. If real, such objects exceed the capabilities of human-made aircrafts or rockets. I quickly realized that the distance of these dark objects must have been incorrectly overestimated by an order of magnitude, or else their bow shock in the Earth's atmosphere would have generated a bright fireball with an easily detectable optical luminosity. So that's his argument, right? His argument for this is it can't be that far away, because if it was, it wouldn't be possible, right? It can't be 10 kilometers away and still flying through the air that fast, because anything that flies through the air that fast that you can see will create a shock wave through the air, right? It would impact some environmental impact. In this case, he said it'd be moving so fast it would cause a giant fireball, right? That friction. It would be a hypersonic aircraft-sized object going through the air. It's going to create immense friction. Okay, that's why you go up into space. He says so much it would be a giant explosion. So his argument is it can't be possible because that's not possible, right? But what about the Tic Tac? I mean, the whole point of the Tic Tac is that you could see it, and yet it could just zoom away and not impart a shockwave. No supersonic boom. That's the whole point of the 5 observables. The 5 observables is that it's something that our physics can't explain, can't understand. So if everything we find, we just say, let's not look at that because it can't be possible, well, we're never going to find out anything that's not possible and make it possible. We won't understand new things. My paper points out that any supersonic motion of such devices through the Earth's atmosphere would inevitably be accompanied by optical emission. I concluded that the reported speeds and sizes of the phantom objects would have generated fireballs of detectable optical luminosity at their suggested distances, and so these objects could not have appeared dark, because it's not possible. However, if the phantom objects are 10 times closer than suggested, then their angular motion on the sky corresponds to a physical velocity that is 10 times smaller, 1.4 kilometers per second, and their inferred transverse size would be 0.3 to 1.2 meters, both characteristic of artillery shells. So this is Avi's argument. What's also interesting for this case is Avi runs the Galileo project. I started UAP Society. We are supporting and funding as best we can Sky360.org. Sky360 is run by Richard Hopf. He's using these type of sensor systems to investigate UAPs in the sky, to capture these ideas. So I had an hour-and-a-half discussion with Richard Hopf. This is just a small part of it, of that discussion. You can check out the full brief on UAP Society YouTube. Check that out here. What about the Tic Tac? My big argument is that's the whole point. That's the whole point of the 5 observables. Is that
true?
Yeah, the Tic Tac, the whole reason it's very interesting, or one of the reasons it's interesting to me is that the Tic Tac doesn't make any sonic booms, right? There's no shockwaves.
Yeah.
And that's basically noted in most UAP events is there's no sound and there's no shockwave. So the fact that there's no sound and no shockwave, that is at least evidence to me, or at least an indicator that what Avi is saying is not correct, that there are instances like the Tic Tac where you can see it, David Fravor saw it, but then it was able just to accelerate away at an amazing speed that couldn't happen if it was pushing the molecules out of the way.
True. So, Chris, what we already learned in the last, let's say, year is that there are craft or objects that are multi-medium, transmedium objects. So they go from air into water without a splash, without speed reduction, without any sign of reaction with the medium. Otherwise, they couldn't go into the water like they go from air into water. You know what I mean? There has to be a change if they are in our 3D environment, like we are. So maybe, and this is the theory behind it, maybe there is a force field, whatever, that creates a sphere around the object that allows the object, maybe this is just a very thin laminate between our atmosphere and the interior of that sphere. You know what I mean? That the force field creates this barrier. Yeah, you see it in this anguilla.
Yeah, this is Aguadilla. I think probably one of the best UAP videos, if not the best. And you see here, this is where it goes through into the water.
Yeah, no splash.
With no splash, right? It's not affecting the environment.
True.
So my point to Avi Loeb is, I mean, what about this? I mean, I get it. The argument he gave is great. I am glad he spoke up, and I hope he continues to do that. Right? We need science. I don't know of any other major scientists who are making papers on this, so I'm happy he did. But at the same point, his main argument is that it has to be closer because it's not possible for something to go through the air, or that we can see it go through the air, but it doesn't make a shockwave and it doesn't make a fireball. Right? It's interacting. But then we'll never find anything new. This is like my problem with the academic world is okay, if that's not possible, and your main take is, okay, it can't be possible because it's not possible, then we're never gonna we're never gonna find anything
And
new.
you only explain it with your mindset that you already have. So anything that is flying in our air can only be a meteorite or an asteroid, and they have to react with the atmosphere, and so have to create a sign of energy there, so light or temperature.
Yeah, exactly.
If he's not considering transmedium craft like this, then of course he's true if there are only asteroids and meteorites.
Yes.
But we know there's different things too. And if he's not considering these other things, then he is acting like a debunker. And this is
I was
actually
surprised.
no
I mean,
good.
Exactly. Let's hear.
And that means that their size, instead of being 10 meters, would be 1 meter. And that means that their speed, instead of being 10 kilometers per second or 15 kilometers per second, would be just 1 to 1.5 kilometers per second. Because they see them moving on the sky in angle. And translating that to a speed means that you need to know the distance. So if the distance is down by a factor of 10, the speed is down by a factor of 10. And then I realized both the speed and the size of the objects is exactly the same as artillery shells. So Ukraine is in military conflict. Artillery shells must be common. That's what they saw. That was a piece of cake to basically conclude that. And I submitted a paper within a couple of hours on this because I had the formula and I had everything written down.
That's that was like kind of the first giveaway for me. I already had it. I already had the idea, and I already had the equations ripped out. So in a few hours, I just wrote this paper saying what it is. Obviously, it's artillery. It's artillery shells, and I guess he goes on to, I don't know, hammer the astronomers there, basically. And maybe they deserve it, for putting this stuff out. But it looks like he was already biased. Like he even says, I already had the idea that it was artillery. And I already had the idea that it's not possible, right? What they're claiming.
It's if you use Occam's razor in a harsh way. Using Occam's razor on anything is not very scientific. I mean, most things can be explained very easily if you take things in a simple way. But let's say if you eliminate everything that's complicated and reduce a problem to the simplest part, then that is in most cases true for our reality. Yes, that's why Occam's razor. But if you use Occam's razor and do not, for example, the Aguadilla object, and do not know about this, and you do not take this into account in your thinking when you write this paper, and just use Occam's razor on old thinking, let's say, for me it feels like a debunking, and I think he does not do a good on the topic itself and on the astronomers by themselves. So it feels like one astronomer pecks on the other astronomer. That's the touch that I get.
Yeah, let's see what he says here.
It was really interesting because to me, it was obvious that they made a mistake by at least a factor of 10. I mean, in principle, it could be more than a factor of 10 in distance. This could be, for example, just bullets shot from a machine gun that is 100 meters from the observatory.
And I mean, he's right. It could be. So that's a good argument, but it doesn't mean.
How do you triangulate?
That it is? Yeah. He does highlight.
I cannot tell, but definitely not farther than 1 kilometer, because then you would get these fireballs that would be impossible to avoid. So then I thought, okay, well, that's an obvious conclusion. Everyone would agree with me. But what do I see? People saying, oh, he didn't take into account the possibility. I mean, these are UAP advocates on Twitter saying he didn't consider the possibility that these objects could pass through air without interacting with it. Oh. And to that I say, well, how were these objects discovered? They were discovered by being dark. That means that they block light. What is light? Light is an electromagnetic entity, an electric field, magnetic field that interacts with objects. So if you block light, the object must have electromagnetic interactions. And therefore, it must interact with the molecules of air, because the molecules of air interact electromagnetically. So you cannot, on the one hand, claim that an object blocks light and doesn't block molecules of air, because molecules of air interact electromagnetically. And in fact, they have a larger cross-section than light has for interacting with matter. So it's easier to interact with molecules of air than it is with the particles of light, photons. And so altogether, what that means is, if you see a dark object that blocks light, as these observers claim, it's just a matter of logic to conclude that it must push the molecules of air when it moves through air, because it also blocks light. And as a result, it will create this fireball if it were a 10-kilometer distance. There is no way out of that. You cannot invent an object that will block light and not block molecules of air.
Are you sure, Avi? I guess.
Our standpoint of physics that we have today, he's right. If something is not reacting with our atmosphere, we would not be able to see it. So why see a black object that blocks out other things? True. But he does not, in this case, if he is true, then the Aguadilla case would never have happened.
Yes.
How
Exactly.
can you see an object that is transmedium? You shouldn't be able to see it if it's transmedium, because if it is not reacting with the medium that's surrounding, it is not reacting with the photons that is surrounding it.
Exactly.
The reflections. But if it's self-emitting, then of course you would see that.
That's a great point. You know, I guess, and that's what's breaking everyone's mind on the Tic Tac is, how can you see something, but then it doesn't make any sound? Like, how does it not make any shockwave? How does something sit in no wind? You know, that's kind of just as weird for me as when these things are stationary in high winds.
But if, for example, if you take a real dark color, you know, this Vanta black color, for example, and you paint something with this black color, it is not reflecting any light because it is so nanoparticle, so small that every light that hits it is consumed. It's not reflecting anything back. And when you take this, let's say you have a figure and you paint it Vanta black, and you put it in front of you, you cannot see through. Although it is absorbing everything and not reflecting, you know? So that's why I think black objects can still be seen as only, let's say, shading the thing, the light that is behind it.
This would be the albedo-less. It's like a black hole of light. So it's what I think Avi is saying is everything reflects light, right? So he's saying everything reflects light, except there are things that don't reflect light that we can see, which is a black hole, right? We can see a black hole. It doesn't reflect light. So yeah, that would be your albedo-less. But his argument is, if we can't see the sky behind these objects, then they must be reflecting the light back to us. Interesting.
I don't see it reflecting here.
This would
be consuming, absorbing,
blocking it.
Yeah, blocking it.
Well, his main argument is that how can it reflect photons? How can it reflect light or interact with light but not interact with the environment? And the simple argument, I would say, the counter would be, look at Aguadilla. You know, how can this happen?
How can this happen? How can we still see it, although it is transmedium?
Exactly. Okay, you can watch that full interview on UAP Society YouTube, link in the description. Very happy to see Avi Loeb talking about this subject, engaging, right? His scientific credentials really do bring a lot of credibility to the field. That being said, he still brings that academic issues as well to the field, right? He can't imagine that this could be possible, right? He couldn't imagine that there could be Foo Fighters. So maybe if he's correct, maybe he's correct with the phantom objects. What about the luminous objects? What about all those things? Is that he didn't even begin to describe those or analyze it. So I'm happy to see Avi out there, and I think he continues to engage. He says in an interview, he says that it was a great learning experience for him because he learned who was reasonable. Basically, who out there in the world is reasonable to engage with or to work with. I think this is the wrong lesson, at least for Avi Loeb. I think Avi Loeb needs to learn that there are unreasonable things that exist because we don't understand them yet or don't understand that they're reasonable. If the Tic Tac is correct, then Avi's argument, this whole argument for these being artillery shells, is incorrect, right? It doesn't make sense. What about Aguadilla? You have to explain that. If you're not going to look at that, then you're not going to look at all of the options. You're never going to get to the answer, right? We have to look at all options. You can check out my last video on ultra-terrestrials. That was Hal Puthoff's main point, is we need to be looking at all options and from a forensic standpoint. Okay, this is speculation. Avi is speculating that these are artillery. I know he doesn't have the details. I know he doesn't have the data. If he had the data, he would do a better job, I think. But this is just speculation. He believes it's possible that they could be artillery shells because otherwise it's not possible, right? It's an impossible thing. So it must be his speculation that it's artillery shells, okay? You're never going to find anything new. Thanks for being here, everybody. Smash that like button if you do like this content, subscribe, and then join patreon.com/Chris Lato. Come to UAP Society. Join the Discord. We got a lot of places to work. Have a great week. Peace.